Landlords in New Jersey are warning that they will go bankrupt if they have to comply with new climate change regulations, and they're begging for federal help. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the issue of climate change, okay? And specifically with the regulations that they're going to be putting on landlords wherever they impose these new policies to help deal with climate change. Now, regardless of what you think of climate change, if you think it's real or not, the reaction by a lot of these local and state governments is very real, and it's a bad deal for landlords. Okay, I'm talking about they're telling us that, hey, we're not going to allow natural gas hookups in house anymore. No more natural gas appliances. You need to retrofit your buildings and spend tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars trying to comply with all of these new regulations. And obviously, a lot of landlords just cannot afford that. Now, they put these regulations in place with the thought of, the same stupid thought they always have, which is, oh, landlords are rich. They're going to comply because we tell them to, not realizing that, hey, there's a lot of smaller landlords in here who are going to get caught up in this mess. It's going to be a regulatory nightmare, and they will not be able to afford to do the retrofitting and the upgrades that they suggest. They're barely getting by in a lot of cases. And, I realize that, hey, in their minds, they see this as a real issue, but they need to think of the fact that, hey, without help from the government, these landlords won't be able to afford to do this. And all that's going to do is create a system where you got a lot of landlords who are out of compliance, a lot of landlords who basically, to get into compliance, would go bankrupt. And that's not right. It's just not right. So yeah, this is an absolutely crazy situation. And I actually have a second article too, and it's going over the numbers, just how much this kind of retrofitting is going to cost in New York City. Now, I know New York and New Jersey, obviously they're going to be doing things a little bit differently, but they have very similar methods of going about trying to tackle this issue. So in New Jersey, expect the cost to be just as high for landlords there as it is going to be in New York. Now, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. What do you think of all of these new regulations and rules and policies that they're putting in place that landlords will have to comply with in these places in order to deal with climate change? I mean, really, what do you think of this? I'm going to let you know my opinion right now, okay? I think that all of this stuff, it's not going to make any difference to climate change whatsoever. The only thing it's going to do is it's going to, put this huge burden on landlords, and it's going to put the landlords in a bad situation because they're going to have to raise the rents in order to pay for all of the retrofitting, all of the new upgrades that the government is demanding that they do. The problem is, in a place like New York or in New Jersey in particular, they have rent control policies there. So they could put hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into these buildings, and they won't be able to rise the rents up to the rate in order to cover the cost of all this retrofitting and all these upgrades. And of course, they're like, oh, well, we'll give them tax rebates or whatever, right? But remember, they got to pay for those costs out of pocket, and then maybe they can get some of that money that they spent back. It's a complete joke. The only people who are going to be able to afford this are the very, very large mega corporations, okay? And all the smaller landlords, they're going to get completely screwed over. So I'm against it, okay? I'm 100% against it. And I believe that, simply put, there needs to be a longer timetable put on it, and there needs to be a grandfather clause for people who are have owned their buildings for a long time and don't have the money to do those upgrades. They didn't think of smaller landlords at all. And by smaller, that could be somebody who owns one building, and it could be a relatively large building, but, telling that person they have to spend tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars upgrading that building it's too much of a burden, okay? Anyway, the first article I have for you today is coming from valuewalk.com, and it says, 2 in 3 New Jersey landlords want federal protection from surprise regulations. And they say surprise regulations, but specifically they're talking about these, climate change regulations. So let's get into this article and see what it says. Overwhelming majorities say they could not afford a surprise bill of over $20,000. Almost half think the government must cover all costs if climate change related regulations be introduced to law. Homeownership is a dream many Americans pursue with great desire, vigor, and of course, a tight budget above all. Some have even taken the next step by buying additional properties, or several, which means the potential costs involved in maintenance are multiplied too. Any landlord will have learned that unforeseen costs are just part of the business of owning property. However, sometimes this is a lesson learned a little too late. New Jersey landlords want federal protection. A survey of 3,240 landlords by deckandbalconyinspections.com revealed that almost 2 in 3, 65% of landlords in New Jersey believe a federal law should be introduced to protect them from surprise property regulations that could cost thousands in maintenance fees. At first glance, it might seem preposterous for landlords to demand federal protection from unforeseen costs, but digging deeper into the issue, they do have two solid arguments at their disposal. Well, landlords, they plan for unforeseen costs. The majority of us, we have emergency reserves. We have insurance. We have ourselves covered for some unforeseen costs. Okay, like natural disasters or just stuff breaking, capital expenditures, etc. We can plan for that. I can say, I'm going to have to replace this furnace, and I'm going to have 10 grand sitting around if I need to do that. That's easy for a landlord to plan. You know what's not easy for a landlord to plan? Suddenly a new politician coming into office and demanding that every single one of your properties you have to spend $100,000 upgrading to solar panels or some BS like that. That's something you can't plan. Okay, because you have no clue the laws, rules, and regulations of whatever politician is in office right now is going to pass. Okay, and it's imposed on you to follow these rules. So it's like they come in and they're like, hey, you have to do this. You have no choice in the matter. Well, they can do that to you all day, every day. And in places like New York, New Jersey, that's exactly what these politicians do. They throw out new rules and new laws and new, bills in their cities all the time that affect landlords. All the time. That's why they have specialists and lawyers are the only ones who can navigate the ridiculous systems of rules and laws they have in place. It's unbelievable, and it's really, really hard, especially if you're a small mom and pop landlord, to even run a rental property business there. So, I don't think that any landlord could even plan for what they're talking about here. So let me keep going. As of January 1st, 2022, the No Surprises Act came into effect. This federal law protects people covered under group and individual health plans from receiving surprise medical bills for things like emergency services, even if these services were out of network and received without prior authorization. But as aforementioned, expensive medical bills are not the only costs which people may be unexpectedly hit. This law, which came into effect in 2019, states that certain structures with wood balconies, decks, stairs, and walkways will require a deep dive inspection for safety purposes, and owners have until January 1st, 2025 to complete all initial inspections. While these laws are of course necessary for safety and security reasons, landlords and homeowners also risk the potential of running into thousands of dollars in property maintenance fees. Those who own properties near the ocean or in more wet weather conditions have a higher risk of being hit with these costs given the increased chance of property damage due to these factors. So yeah, they put this law into place, and now landlords are going to have to spend thousands of dollars and get all these inspections done, etc., and try to come into compliance. So yeah, that's what they're trying to protect against, and I am all for it. The problem I have is, there's so many different rules and regulations set by different levels of government. So you'll have, laws for your city. You'll have laws for your county. You'll have laws for your state. And then you'll have to follow federal law on top of that. And you can't possibly know all of the rules that you're trying to comply with. I mean, we do the best we can, and a lot of the times landlords are a little bit behind the times and they get caught up in this mess. Next thing you know, they're getting fines from the city and they have to come into compliance. So getting hit with these surprise bills, it's complete garbage. Okay, give us time in order to fix the problems, or don't throw these ridiculous regulations on us in the first place. That's my suggestion. So yeah, I agree, and I understand why these landlords are fighting against, especially this climate change stuff. They're talking about in California requiring all new housing to have solar panels on top. They're talking about, in some places requiring all landlords to remove all of their gas hookups and everything be 100% electric so they can stop, carbon emissions. You think this stuff is free? It's not. It's going to cost tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars per building. Okay? And speaking of that, I'm going to get into this next article. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but, it kind of goes into the costs associated. And we're going to be talking about New York City. So this article is coming from rewonline.com. And it says, owners facing $20 billion bill to meet climate change laws. So yeah, right from the beginning, it's going to cost $20 billion to retrofit these buildings up in New York. But let me go ahead with this article. The city's new carbon emissions laws are set to cost the real estate industry some $20 billion over the next decade. And as retrofitting program that is estimated to be the biggest in the world gets underway, owners are being urged to think ahead to avoid running out of time and help. We need the market to function rationally, said John Mandick, CEO of the Urban Green Council. The market is prepared, in my opinion, but we need them to be early adopters. So yeah, once again, somebody who doesn't have to spend any money, usually a politician or some activist or advocate is sitting there. Well, they should be prepared. I mean, we're talking about $20 billion worth of upgrades here. You think that everybody's going to be prepared? Because they're not, okay? You need to think about reality here. Your fantasy where everyone, is super rich and they can just afford to deal with all of this at once. I mean, it's just a fantasy. You're wrong. You're just dead wrong. And, you're going to see the consequences of these ridiculous regulations when you see extremely high rents. You're going to see developers and investors just backing out of these areas. You're going to see people leaving, declines in population because it's too expensive to live there and it's overregulated. And that's what we, can expect going into the future with all of this nonsense, So I'm out here looking out for the landlords, and I want to warn people about this stuff because this is coming. I could see this kind of stuff passing throughout the entire country, with all these climate change regulations or whatever, especially if the federal government puts them into place. So watch out, fight it while you can, okay, before they get these stupid rules in place.